Here's a feeling you already know. You get to the end of a full day, and you couldn't point to a single moment in it. It didn't feel slow, and it didn't feel fast. It just felt packed. One thing pressed straight up against the next, with nothing in between. We usually call that being busy, and we treat it as a problem of time. Not enough hours, too much to do. But there's another way to describe it, and it comes from a single Japanese word. The problem isn't that you had too little time. It's that your day had no gaps. Nothing was allowed to sit next to empty space, and a day with no gaps doesn't feel long or short. It feels shapeless. The word is ma. It's usually translated as negative space, or the space between. That translation is correct, and it undersells the idea badly. Because in Japanese, this one small word sits inside the words for time, for space, and even for a human being. I want to show you what's inside it, not as a piece of trivia, as a different way of seeing an ordinary day. Because once you have a name for the gap, you start to notice every place you've deleted it. And I'll be honest with you later about which part of this actually travels to your life and which part belongs to the culture that made it. Start with the character itself, because it's a picture, and the picture is the whole idea. The written character for ma is a gate with the sun showing through it. An older version used the moon instead, moonlight coming through the crack of a doorway. Either way, the image is the same, light that you can only see because there's a gap. Close the gate completely, and there's nothing to see. The opening is what lets the light in. That's the concept in one image. Ma is not emptiness in the sense of nothing. It's the opening that makes everything else legible. The pause that lets you hear the note that came before it. The space around an object that lets you actually see the object. And here's the part that's hard to hold in English, because English splits it into two different words. Ma means the gap in space, the distance between two things. And it means the gap in time, the pause between two moments. Same word. In Japanese, those aren't two ideas that happen to share a label. They're felt as one thing. An interval, whether you measure it in centimeters or in seconds. So when we say, a room feels empty, or a conversation had an awkward silence, we're describing a lack. Ma describes the same thing as a presence. The gap is not what's missing from the room. The gap is part of what the room is. Hold on to that inversion, because everything else follows from it. The West tends to treat the space between things as wasted, something to fill, shorten, optimize away. Ma treats the space between things as the thing that gives the rest its shape. Now here's what convinced me this wasn't just an aesthetic idea, but a whole way of seeing baked into a language. That same character, that gate with the light coming through, is sitting inside the most ordinary words a person uses every day. The word for time, jikan, contains it. The word for space, kukan, contains it. Time and space are literally built out of the word for gap. To a Japanese speaker, at the level of the characters, time isn't a line you run along. It's an interval you're inside of. There's an expression, maniao, that means to be on time, to make it. Taken literally, character by character, it means something closer to the gap fits. The interval works out. You didn't beat the clock. The space was the right size. And then there's the one that stopped me. The word for a human being, ningen, is written as person, plus that same gap, between person. And in its older use, the word didn't point at the individual at all. It pointed at the space among people, the human world, the between. Only later did it come to mean the single person standing in front of you. Sit with that for a second. In the deep structure of the word, a human being isn't a self-contained unit. It's something that exists in the gaps between other people. You are quite literally a between. I'm not telling you every Japanese speaker walks around consciously thinking this. Nobody thinks about the roots of their own words most of the time. You don't hear goodbye as God be with you. But the concept is in there, load-bearing, holding up the vocabulary, and a language quietly teaches its speakers what to notice. You can see the same idea show up the moment anyone in Japan makes something. In No, the old form of Japanese theater, the most important moments are often the ones where nothing happens. An actor holds still, the gesture stops. The power of the scene lives in the pause before the next movement, the ma. The No scholar Komparu Kunio went as far as calling No the art of ma. An actor doing just enough to open a blank space where nothing is done. Music that lives in the gaps between the sounds rather than in the sounds. A dance built on the technique of not moving. Cut those pauses to speed the thing up, and you haven't tightened the performance. You've deleted it. Music works the same way. The silence between two sounds isn't dead air waiting to be filled. It's the interval that gives the two sounds their relationship. Shorten every silence, and you don't get a better piece of music. You get noise. You see it in a traditional room, where the empty floor is not unfinished. It's the point. You see it in a single flower placed in a wide space rather than a bouquet crammed into a vase. You see it in a brush painting, where most of the paper is left untouched, and the untouched part is doing at least half the work. In every one of these, the discipline is the same, and it's the opposite of the instinct most of us have. The instinct is to add, fill the wall, fill the silence, fill the schedule. The skill of Ma is knowing what not to add, and trusting the gap to carry meaning. That's a genuinely difficult skill, by the way. It's much easier to add another thing than to defend an empty space against the urge to fill it. Anyone who's tried to leave 1 hour of a day unscheduled knows exactly how that urge feels. Now, I have to be straight with you about the title of this video, because you deserve that. Why They Never Feel Rushed is the promise I put on the thumbnail, and taken literally, it isn't true. Japan is not some uniformly slow, unhurried place. It's famous, if anything, for the opposite. Long working hours, packed trains, a culture that takes intensity seriously. If you came here for proof that one society cracked the code on stress, I don't have it, and anyone who hands it to you is selling something. So, let me replace clickbait with the real claim, which is smaller and, I think, more useful. Having a word for the gap doesn't make you calm, but it changes what you're able to notice. This is a well-worn idea in how language works. It's much easier to perceive something once you have a name for it. Give a name to the pause, the interval, the space between, and suddenly you can see when it's there and when it's been erased. Most of us don't have that name, so we experience a rushed day as a vague pressure with no obvious cause. We can't point to what's wrong, because the thing that's wrong is an absence, and we have no word for the absence. We've never been taught to see gaps as things. Ma is at bottom a pair of glasses. It doesn't slow the world down. It lets you see the shape of your own day. The places where one thing is jammed against the next with no interval, and the rare places where you left some room. And you can't fix what you can't see. That's the honest version. Not they never feel rushed. More like, they inherited a word that makes the rushing visible. And you can borrow the word without pretending to have inherited the whole culture around it. There's one more thing I owe you, and it's the kind of thing this channel exists to say out loud. When you hear ancient Japanese concept of ma, it sounds like something handed down unbroken for 1,000 years. A single philosophy every generation understood the same way. The reality is more interesting than that, and a little more modern. The raw materials are genuinely old. The pauses in no, the empty space in a painting, the character itself, those go back centuries. But ma as a single, unified concept, the tidy idea you can put in an exhibition and write a book about, that was largely assembled much more recently, in the 1960s and 70s. A German architect named Günther Nitschke wrote one of the first essays introducing ma to the Western architecture world back in 1966. Then in 1978, the Japanese architect Isozaki Arata built an entire touring exhibition called Ma, Spacetime in Japan. It opened in Paris and traveled on to New York, Houston, Chicago, Stockholm, and Helsinki. That tour is a large part of why the word is known outside Japan at all. And here's the part I want to get right, because it's easy to tell this story badly. The lazy version is that Japan packaged an idea up for foreigners. That's not what happened. A French scholar of Japan, Michael Lucken, went back and traced where the modern concept actually came from, and found it forming on both sides at once. In Europe, yes, but also in Japan, in the work of a philosopher named Nakai Masakazu, and through a long conversation with German philosophy, with Heidegger, and phenomenology in particular. Soma, as we now receive it, is a genuinely modern piece of Japanese thinking. Not a folk tradition handed down intact, and not a tourist brochure either. Something more interesting than both. None of that makes ma fake. The pauses are real, the character is real, the way of seeing is real, but the neat, exportable philosophy of ma is younger than it sounds. Knowing that doesn't cost you the idea. It only costs you the fantasy that you're touching something ancient and untouched. And that fantasy was never the useful part. Borrowing with your eyes open is the only honest way to borrow anything from another culture. So what actually comes home with you, and what stays behind? What transfers is the perception. This one is real, and it's yours the moment you want it. You now have a name for the gap, and having the name is most of the work. For the next few days, you'll catch yourself noticing the exact places you've deleted ma. The meeting that starts the second the last one ends, the meal eaten over a screen, the walk you filled with a podcast so that not 1 minute went unused. You didn't have those glasses last week. Now you do. The practical version is almost embarrassingly simple. Leave one gap. One unfilled interval in a day. The length of a coffee, a walk to nowhere. 5 minutes at a window doing genuinely nothing. Not to relax, not to be productive, not as a technique with a payoff. Just to put one deliberate space back into a day that had none. The point isn't the rest. The point is to feel the shape a gap gives to the things on either side of it. What doesn't transfer is the depth. Someone raised inside this doesn't decide to notice ma. It's absorbed across a lifetime, through a language and an art and a set of rooms built around it. You can borrow the word and the way of seeing. You can't download the sensibility, and you'll sound faintly ridiculous if you try to perform it. Borrowing a lens is honest. Cosplaying a culture isn't. That's the whole split. Take the word. Take the habit of leaving one gap. Leave the rest where it belongs. And the next time a day feels shapeless, and you can't say why, you'll have a word for it. The gaps are missing. Put one back.